Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, brought to you by Supply Management in partnership with GEP. Today, we'll be discussing whether technology has been more of a help or a hindrance in procurement, and whether it is truly the driver to get us on the road to greater productivity and efficiency. My name is Katie Jacobs. I'm the editor of Supply Management, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm delighted to be joined by two expert speakers today. They are Paul Blake, Associate Director, Technology Product Marketing at GEP, and Wayne Clark, Vice President, Global Delivery at GEP. Paul, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and greetings from the rather wet New Jersey here on this summer's morning. Great pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the next hour. Hope you are too. I've been with GEP now for 6 years and have a long history of working in the technology space, going back to the mid-1990s, where I cut my teeth in the procurement space with very early stage business-to-business procurement systems based on CD technology, long before the internet became a really big thing. And I've been talking about, writing about, and thinking about procurement technology and technology's impact on how people work for the best part of 30 years, I guess. So I'll try and share some of my ideas with you this morning and see what you think. That's me.
Fabulous. Thanks, Paul. It sounds like you've got plenty of really great experience and can't wait to hear what you're going to share with us today. Over to you, Wayne. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and your interest in this topic?
Sure. Thanks, Katie, and hello, everybody. My name is Wayne Clark, VP of Global Delivery at GEP. I've got 20-plus years of experience in procurement and supply chain consulting. Currently based in Richmond, Virginia, but over 10 years of that was based out of London in the UK with a strong focus on European clients. Most of my clients' work is now on global scales. At GEP, I focus on helping lead what we call large-scale procurement transformations, which is really helping clients look at their overall procurement model and help them reach new performance levels through a combination of everything, really: org structure, skill building, process improvements, and more technology, which is clearly the focus of today. So yeah, wonderful to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us today. I have to say, I think it's a really fascinating area, something in my discussions with procurement people, professionals and leaders. Technology and transformation is always on the agenda, and I'd say it's definitely something that's keeping people awake at night. So today we're going to be talking about the productivity plateau. That means that despite the number of tools that are available to us, the UK productivity has remained flat for quite a long time. So we're going to be looking at why. We're going to be discussing the impact of technology, procurement's traditional reliance on some of those more labor-intensive processes that can serve as the perfect place for demonstrating the transformational potential of newer technologies. When you do away with disparate systems and those awful disjointed solutions that we've all used, they impede and frustrate users and stakeholders. When information can flow freely, and work flows and processes become easy to understand and satisfying to use, then everyone within procurement and outside of it becomes much more productive and effective. So over the next hour or so, we're going to be looking at the reasons behind current impediments to productivity, particularly inside the procurement function, but also outside of it and more widely in the way that all of us live and work. We're going to explore the relationships among data and information, process and workflows, productivity and effectiveness. We're going to learn why state-of-the-art procurement software is making user experience such a high priority. And we're going to hear reports from the field about the real-world challenges and impacts and how you can get that kind of very successful change management. And then after the presentations, we are going to have time for audience Q&As. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask the audience to please do get involved over the next hour as we discuss this important topic. Please submit your questions using the comments bar underneath the slideshow, which hopefully you should all have in front of you. You can submit them at any time throughout the discussion, but we'll come to them at the end. So please, whenever something comes into your head, just type it into the box. The webinar's also going to be available on demand from tomorrow, so do share it with your colleagues. And the slides will also be available, so there's no need to ask about that later. Now I'd like to hand over to Paul from GEP to kick us off.
Thank you again, Katie. Yeah, so procurement transformation. It's a big subject. It's a popular topic of conversation within our industry, and digital transformation is also a topic of conversation that has been raging for some time across the whole of industry, and digital procurement transformation is kind of this catch-all that we're all talking about, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about it today as well. But in that phrase, digital procurement transformation, there's a problem word, and the word is not procurement, it's not even digital, it's transformation. It is one of those grandiose terms that has been applied to more run-of-the-mill situations where it isn't really warranted. And we talk about, transformation programs when they're not actually transformative. What companies are seeking today, and quite rightly in my opinion, is a step change in value realization from procurement and supply chain, a quantum jump in output. Anything short of that, any straightforward, simple, incremental improvements, day-to-day improvements, that's not transformation. Likewise, in the digital space, in the world of technology and software, transformation doesn't come from just an upgrade, certainly not from an upgrade alone. Transformation is the result of a whole-scale reinvention of how we work and how we do business. And this is why procurement transformation is, in my opinion, so tightly bound to technology, and why it can remain elusive in many cases. There is no simple fix, and the fix certainly doesn't come from a choice to get a new piece of software, to get a new sourcing tool. It's far more complex than that. And in fact, I'd venture the idea that it is our expectations that software is somehow the solution that prevents us in many cases from moving forward. And I say that as the person responsible for marketing a software product. So in this sense, I'd like to challenge the idea that business as usual, particularly when it comes to our relationship with technology, simply offers us nothing if we want to see real transformation. And instead, we need to take an entirely new approach, yes, facilitated by new technology rather than dictated by it, and in doing so, forge a solution in the workplace by bringing together people, process, and technology in a new way. So I'm going to start with that bold statement about a productivity plateau. As Katie implied in her introduction, there is an issue with productivity in the workplace today, and I think we have hit a productivity plateau. In the last couple of decades, we've seen technology come to dominate the workplace and our lives outside of it. All of it has apparently made us more productive and successful, but has it? Let's take a look at some data from the Office of National Statistics in the UK. And at the turn of the millennium, the significant changes we saw in working practices in the 80s and 90s was starting to drive a real growth curve, a real upturn in output and productivity. A very linear growth in the first half of the last 20 years. Now, you might expect that growth has simply continued as it is, and this would be our line of best fit and to tell us where growth and output productivity should be around about now. And you might be forgiven for thinking that around 2007, 2008, there was a bit of a downturn as a result of a small glitch in the global economy. But actually, that did happen. But since then, as Katie said, output has effectively flatlined in the developed economies since then. Now, there's a lot of varied and complex reasons as to why that might be so. There was a slow recovery from the global recession of around 10 years ago, and we're still seeing the results of some of that. But my contention is that technology plays a big part in this. It seems almost at the time that workplace technologies hit saturation point, productivity growth faltered. And much of that may be due to the slow recovery, but I believe that other factor is that technology that we have has posed fundamental limits on how effective we can actually be. The first flush of digital technologies had a great positive impact on productivity. There's no doubt about that. I'm not questioning that at all. But perhaps we've reached some kind of limit. And getting beyond that will require not just more of the same, but something new. You see, the limitations of our technology can fundamentally act as a brake on our growth in productivity, despite having been the source of that growth in the past. Today's workplace technology model, built around the three pillars of email, standalone documents, and standalone applications, imposes limits on how efficient and effective we can actually be. But do without email, consign documents to the bin, reject the notion of best-in-class applications. That all sounds like heresy, doesn't it? But interestingly, this perspective was echoed a few months ago. I saw this news article on the BBC News site talking about a report from Microsoft. And the report from Microsoft said technology can distract workers rather than making them more productive. This is Microsoft saying this, right? And in commentating about this, Professor Kerry Cooper from the Manchester Business School, he said he had this wonderful thing to say, which is technology can overload people and make them less productive because they get caught up in it rather than use it to deliver a service or a product. I mean, I definitely recognize myself in that. And this is the real kicker for me. Productivity comes from creative interchange. It does not come from people sitting in front of machines sending emails. And he is, of course, absolutely correct. But how many of us believe that we've had a productive morning if by 11 a.m. we've been able to empty the inbox? We take the most productive hours in the day and we give them over to opening the mail. And we think that that is our job. That has become our job. Our job has become dealing with mail. But we're no more productive than we used to be. This is the final graph I have for you, I promise. This is actually data from my mailbox. So I joined GEP 6 years ago. And over that time, the volume of email that I have to deal with has increased. Now, I'm quite diligent about getting rid of spam, getting rid of relevant emails into folders where I can get at them later and deal with them. So this is just the noise that's left, if you like. And at the end of my first quarter with GEP, I had maybe 60 or 70 emails left. At the end of last quarter, when I did this investigation into my mailbox, I had over 3,000 noise emails left. Am I more productive now than I was 6 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago? I don't think so. And there's nothing whatsoever that Microsoft or any software company can do to increase my productivity if what I am doing is spending my day dealing with email. So I can't transform my productivity. I can't read any quicker. I can't type any quicker. I certainly can't think any quicker than I did a decade ago. So my throughput is exactly the same as it was. And when our procurement practices are dominated by this mode of operation, this mode of thinking that we've become programmed to do around the technology, it's no surprise that transformation becomes something difficult to reach. Now, there has long been a well-held notion that people, process, and technology are of equal importance when we're looking at change management, and I'm not going to dispute that at all. But the idea that each of these can be re-engineered and replaced in isolation, the idea that process can be technology agnostic, I think is wrong today. And what we're seeing very clearly is that it's all part of one single process, because people only use software to do their work, even if it's just email and spreadsheets and Word documents. Software is where it's at. So my contention is that technology is no longer a tool for helping the procurement process. It actually defines the process that we can follow and determines whether we can be successful or not. It is people using technology that determine the process. If you pay a huge amount of money for consultants to come in and redefine your process without an understanding of the people and without an understanding and a recognition of the technology that is in play, that will not be what effort that is put to good use. It can be wasted resource and wasted investment. Now, in the world of technology, it's the world of procurement, and with a view to technology, there is a traditional road to success, the end-to-end procurement process, the journey from opportunity to savings. And we have typically mapped out this process in technology terms as a series of stops along the road. We start with a bit of planning, and perhaps we use a spreadsheet for that, and then later on we'll do some sourcing, maybe in a standalone sourcing tool, an RFP tool or an auction platform or something, and then a little way down the road do some purchasing, perhaps in the ERP system, and maybe even have some software to do some supplier relationship management. But typically that is something that is also done with emails and documents and spreadsheets and questionnaires and so on. And by the way, contract management, that is something completely different. That is a different group of people. It's a different set of documents. It's a different environment entirely. And so that's kind of down the side road, somewhere off. And this is a model that, however familiar, fails to recognize that software is where we work. And it's not stops along the road. It is the road on which we travel. Like it or not, pretty much all of our interactions with the outside world beyond immediate line of sight are today mediated through software. And what that software doesn't allow us to do doesn't get done. You know, the all-important contract in the process is often shunted off to the side. It's not part of the road on which we travel. And what we're seeing now is, because software is where the business happens, those various stops can actually become rocks in the road. They're barriers for us getting down the road quicker, more efficiently, more effectively, getting greater results out of it than we were before. And that's what we're seeking in transformation. That's what we're looking for, is to be able to get there quicker, get there more frequently, and get a greater result out of it when we get to the end of that road. But we're having to spend time negotiating around these roadblocks. And the contract itself can become the all-encompassing roadblock. Yes, your contract may be in a soft form as a digital document that's maybe stored in SharePoint, but does that mean you can get it more effectively used? You can have more people in the organization accessing it, buying from it, being compliant with it, utilizing the contract. Are the suppliers using the contract in the way that they should to deliver the extra value to you? Just having it in software doesn't give you that particular result. So let's take a look at that end-to-end process very quickly and pick out some of the areas where there are some issues. Our source-to-pay process is a well-understood path for all procurement professionals, of course. We start with an investigation of our historical activity to look for opportunities. Then we create some kind of plan to exploit those opportunities, and then execute on those plans, typically through sourcing and negotiations, setting up an agreement, setting up a contract. And those contracts then have to be managed through the supplier relationship and used at the end of the process in purchasing, in order for that initial opportunity, that original investigation, to yield the results that we want. Now, procurement's part of that process, procurement with a capital P, the procurement organization, they're about taking us to the point of the contract. And all we're doing there is increasing the potential for value. And it is only when the contract is actually used, when the relationship is actively managed correctly, that the savings can actually be realized. So there is a huge potential point of breakdown, which is that the contract never actually gets transmitted, never actually gets used, never actually gets complied with across the rest of the organization. And our experience tells us the larger the organization, the more complex it is, the more politically diverse an organization is, the more difficult that is for those contracts to penetrate and to actually be used. And this has always been the tension between procurement and the rest of the organization, or more specifically between procurement and finance, when procurement say we should have achieved 10% savings in this category, and finance are saying, but we haven't seen any of them, because the contract was never actually used. The contract is not the end game. The contract is simply the vehicle to get there. So our contention is that what we need to do is to change the way in which the information flows, change the way in which the intent and indeed the data underneath moves across the whole of the process. The typical approach to applying software to this process has been to try and find some best-in-class tool for each step in it. So we might have some very sophisticated spend analysis, but then do all our planning in a spreadsheet. Again, we might have some very sophisticated sourcing and negotiation software, but then the contract gets created in Word or even on paper if our attorneys are traditional sorts, and then it gets literally physically filed and forgotten in a cabinet, or it can be stored in SharePoint and filed and forgotten there. And if we don't have a way of gluing all of this together and managing the relationship with the supplier around the contract as a living document within our process, we are exacerbating that challenge of getting that realization. And so this is where I see the reflection between the flat line of productivity and the procurement process of today is we can't actually source more effectively, more frequently, with greater cadence, with greater savings percentages behind it, if we can't get the process working quicker, and if we can't get the data, the information, the intent, the value flowing more freely. So that breakdown between what procurement wants to do and what the company is actually doing is really enhanced by this notion of using the business as usual approach to software. But there's a huge raft of technologies that are coming along that are being talked about that could radically change how we work. And what we're seeing is that the right approach to technology is giving the organizations the chance to drive transformation through changing how their people work, changing how the processes are structured, by using technology that provides that glue, that unification, if you like, of intent underneath. And as we go down the list of technology drivers, they're sort of further away into the future, but they're all coming. So we already have in place the notion of a unified procurement platform where everything works on a single database, if you like, a single set of technologies where that intent can flow right across the board. That, of course, is cloud native, because that's the only way that you can integrate all of that data, all of those different systems together. And as Katie said in the introduction, it is user experience that drives the effectiveness of this. Time and again, we are seeing that software that individual human beings like to use, are familiar with, are happy with, gets much better results than things that perhaps have more features, more whistles and bells, more functionality. Functionality is only good if you're ever going to use it. And what we want is the users to go to the compliant way of purchasing, not to go to the nice, attractive web store that is non-compliant. And therefore, it is attendant upon us in the software industry to make that user experience just as sticky, just as interesting, just as fun for the end users as the consumer type websites and stores that are available. And as the machine learning and artificial intelligence and automation parts of advanced technologies come into play, the role that they will have is not to replace the procurement professionals in the process, but to augment their abilities, to remove the day-to-day mundane, repetitive document choreography processes that we all have to deal with, the opening of the mail, the matching of the invoice and the purchase order and so on, automating that will free the procurement professional, the practitioners, the people in the AP team, the suppliers themselves from the laborious, labor-intensive blocks to increased productivity and free them up to spend their time focusing on the more important issues of creative interchange between human beings. Procurement is a relationship between buyer and supplier. It is not a document process, and yet we have made it such. And by removing these roadblocks, removing the blocks in the road, we can actually create an environment where more effective sourcing, more effective collaboration and innovation is possible in the supply chain between people who are working for the best interests of their respective organizations. So what we're seeing is a digital workplace being created. IT organizations across the world are driving the creation of the digital workplace. And the reason I wanted to put this slide in here was as an invitation to procurement professionals to connect with their IT departments and to not be forgotten. Because procurement has a huge role to play in allowing IT and helping IT to achieve their workplace agenda and to achieve digital transformation for the overall organization, because procurement needs it most today. And IT needs procurement to help them do that, and procurement can go to IT and say, put us front and center in your digital workplace strategy. And the risk otherwise is that IT will look at a digital workplace without considering procurement's requirement, and you will end up with more of the same. So your users are key to success. Users across the organization are key to the success of the whole digital workplace strategy. But don't think that this is a separate issue for procurement and IT, and don't allow your IT colleagues to think of it as a separate issue for procurement. You know, you have to make the case to be part of their key strategy and help them deliver the results that they are trying to reach as well. So this is the end of my kind of part of the theory presentation. The idea of the digital workplace is to overcome all the obstacles that I've talked about by unifying processes into a single digital environment where the purpose of each step, the intent, if you like, can be automatically transferred from one participant to the next, from one step in the process to the next, not as a document or as an email attachment, but as a piece of business. And this idea is predicated on our no longer working in silos created by the software that was designed for other things. All the stakeholders, from the sourcing and category managers to the executive leadership, to the day-to-day requesters and the suppliers themselves, should be able to conduct business and make decisions more swiftly and effectively if we're going to transform. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Wayne, and he's going to actually put some flesh on the bones, so to speak, and tell us how things really are in the real world, because I've told you how I would like them to be and how I believe the future should be. But of course, when we're dealing with real organizations, real human beings, things are a lot more complex. But there are some great opportunities and some great lessons to learn from there. So Wayne, actually, I think Katie, I'm handing back to you first, just before we go over to Wayne.
Thank you very much, Paul, for such a really great grounding in the theory. It really speaks to me. It reminds me I was lucky enough to interview the European VP of Twitter the other day, and that's another big tech company, obviously. And he used this brilliant phrase that he believes that workplace technology is making us prioritize the immediate over the thoughtful and the urgent over the important. So I think your presentation captured that really well.
I will
Wayne,
steal that quote. Thank you,
can
Katie.
steal that quote. I'll send it to you. Wayne, can we hand over to you to ground some of this theory in some real-life applications and to give us some examples of how real organizations are overcoming and dealing with these challenges?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. And thanks, Paul. I mentioned in my introduction that my role is to help clients transform their procurement. model. And we do that not just through advice, but we spend a lot of time helping implement, helping make sure it works. Oftentimes we help operate these processes. And I say that because that means it has to work. We have to deliver on the improved results and the improved performance. We have skin in the game. And I mention that because perhaps like some of you, when the chips are down and you really have to deliver, I've grown to have a healthy skepticism of what technology can do. And yet my role is increasingly focused on just that, on making sure we are absolutely taking advantage of all what technology can bring in its good form, and to try to mitigate the many, many frustrations that a lot of us have in doing just that. So with that, I think I need to be made presenter, or do I?
You have presenter rights, Wayne. Should be yours there.
There we go. Thanks so much. Great. Because what this slide, eye chart that it is, starts to illustrate with procurement processes on one side and software out there supporting all these processes, is that in today's world, we can't separate technology from the activities that we're performing. So integral and so inseparable are the tools that we use from the activities that we're trying to perform, that it has just, in the last few years, truly brought technology out of that sort of quote-unquote enabling role into the transformative role that it's become. And that's born the terminology of digital transformation or digital procurement transformation. You think of all the tools that are available to us to perform our procurement activities, and then you layer in the emerging technologies of big data analytics and blockchain and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the potential, obviously, for doing work better, for driving productivity is there. How we actually achieve that potential is really what I want to focus on, and I'll start with a quick case study and share some of the sort of key learnings that I take from this, because at the end of the day, I'm a consultant trying to drive results. I'm looking at what's going to enable performance improvement. I'm not a technologist. I view myself as more of a humanist or a behavioralist. And so these quotes really kind of resonate for me and sort of set the theme for what I'd like to talk about. The first is that it's not about the tool, it's about the problem that it's solving. And I've got some examples I'll come on to, but you think about introducing a new tool like a spend analysis tool, and that in and of itself we think is going to help drive better results. But what I find is until you can look at your business and look at how you're doing things and say, am I and are my people really having more strategic and fact-based discussions with their stakeholders? Are they bringing more accurate and insightful recommendations based on this spend analysis tool? If we can't say yes to that, then we're not there yet. We haven't answered the problem that the technology was meant to solve for. If your spend is just as messy as it was before, then after you bought this tool, then there's still work yet to be done, and that's the metal that needs to be grasped. The second quote here is that it's really about technology helping to change people for the better, we hope. Technology can be wonderful in driving new behaviors and deliver on that productivity improvement. But I've seen great, for example, P2P tools implemented, and still see an environment where there's high levels of off purchase order buys, low compliance to the tool. And if you peel back the onion, you'll see it's because the purchasing process is still very rigid or painful, or the training was insufficient, or the incentives to move to that new way of working simply weren't enough. And the message is that, and I've seen the opposite too, where you've got fantastic P2P rollouts. Adoption is great, and new behaviors did emerge because we've made it easy for the end user. We've put catalogs in front of them to do easy searches. We've made them easy to simply reorder their most frequent purchases, or simply get help when they need it throughout the process. That really fundamentally is what drove both adoption and the productivity and the benefits that we're targeted for. So that changing of behavior, that's really my focus. I don't worry about robots replacing procurement professionals, but I do worry about tools not enabling improved performance. So let me share a recent case study and kind of take you through what were the key learnings that I took away from this. So this was a recent transformation working with a large global consumer product company. The backdrop there is they had a pretty good operating procurement model, very smart, very bright people, very engaged. Actual performance measured by KPIs were a little bit patchy, but strong team. We're not talking about a low maturity organization. But they were still operating very regionally. The company as a whole was still very regionally siloed, but with a new CEO, their emphasis was really to move towards a very globally integrated firm. They wanted to shift the focus from being U.S.-centric because their growth and their success and their future was more and more outside and across the globe. And they were also under some pretty significant pressures to reduce costs. Their performance was fine, but this was a space ripe with private equity, and they needed to show very, very strong cost controls to avoid being a takeover target. And so there was that's the backdrop, and we partnered closely, and I'll take you through some of the steps that we took, but we started ultimately with the end goal in mind. Not just what are our issues today and how do we fix those, but where do we want to be? And it started with not just a vision of what we're going to do or what our processes are, but what are the next generation performance results we're trying to achieve? Again, to understanding what's the ultimate results we're aiming here for is improved productivity, improved performance. So we started with setting those goals, and then we got into identifying the core capabilities that they would need in the future, not in today's world, but imagining getting to those next level performance targets. What capabilities would they need to reach those? Capabilities like much more strategic partnering with their business stakeholders, much higher levels of global leveraging of their spend across each and every category where it's appropriate, better and augmented spend analysis that was bringing deeper insights to their category teams so that they can truly look for breakthrough opportunities and savings opportunities that will ultimately drive that higher level of performance. We also looked at new global structure, which ultimately was moved outside of the U.S. to support the global strategy. And while doing that and looking at the processes from end to end and making sure that sort of closed loop process from source to pay was thoughtfully designed, the real questions throughout were how do we simplify and enhance this organization and these processes that they manage through technology, and we found many opportunities to automate workflows, approvals and alerts. We augmented their analysis capabilities, moving beyond just sort of off-the-shelf tools, but really leveraging their analysis tools, their internal data, their internal context to help provide even richer insights in their analysis tools. And we took advantage of commercialized opportunities for robotic process operation and some forms of artificial intelligence throughout the process, not because the technology was available, but because we challenged ourselves to say, will it help deliver higher performance? And the results were good. Savings rates did shoot up. They did manage to leverage and their spend far more fully, deeper engagement with their business stakeholders. The feedback from their stakeholders was excellent and growing, really started to see the value that procurement can bring, and built a much more cohesive one global procurement team, so that global operating model really started to work in practice. And the results were starting to come through. Sounds easy and glorified on a page, so let me take you through some of the key lessons that I took away, and some of the things that I think were the real key success factors to this project as they relate to technology. It sounds a little bit trite, but the first lesson I would really sort of emphasize is that technology really works best when it's used. And I say that because it's a finding that not just within this company, but within many firms that we work with, is the adoption issue. So in this example, when we did a procurement assessment, we did a technology assessment, and we can see that they have a really great suite of tools to support almost all aspects of procurement. Good tools, good quality tool suppliers. Most teams around each region were set up on them. It wasn't too U.S. centric in their approach. Pretty good, right? But then we peeled the onion a little bit, and we drilled down to start talking to the category managers, looking at some of the data within these tools, and we find something quite different. We start to find that the actual adoption and usage of these tools was far from great. Far from great, as some of you may know, is a consulting speak for terrible. Not great adoption, and it's obvious on one level that you can't get good value out of your tools if you don't use them. But the real message is where the ball is heading in the digital transformation. When you think about capitalizing on the possibilities of machine learning and artificial intelligence, the usage of these tools becomes profoundly imperative. And so, there's plenty of reasons why usage is low. I'm guilty of this, certainly with the productivity tools that I'm given to use. But some of these, I'm sure, will resonate. I'm faster without the tool. It's too rigid. It can't do what I want. No one else uses it. Or I'm going to get to it soon, but I'm too busy right now. All the way down to, the dismissive, I don't even remember how to log in. That's symptomatic of lots of challenges. Technology implementation, challenging, as we all know. But the reality is, if we all think about how technology is becoming such a part of our everyday lives, it's no longer something we can choose to sort of ignore at our peril. Which leads me on to the second key message here is, if we don't use these tools, we're not really building the pathway towards a real digital strategy, because ultimately, in a digital strategy, data is king. There is a pathway to that sort of nirvana end state of all the sort of possibilities of artificial intelligence that we imagine. And that pathway is sequential. There are building blocks that we need to do to get to those fancy scenarios that we envision, where we can ask Siri to create a spend report or similar. And the steps are pretty clear. First off, we have to capture the data. There is so much power in the AI, but if you think about what artificial intelligence is at its core, it's all built on data. These tools spot patterns. They use probability and statistics and algorithms that are only as good as the data they are mining. You need to build your data mines, and you can't collect and build data mines without starting to use these tools in earnest. Your spend analytics tool is based on PO and invoice data. Your RFX tools are based on spend data. Your contracting is based on sourcing data. And if that data is not captured within your tools, and we're not building up that repository for year on year to create leverage and potential, then we're really not building or seeding the building blocks to get to the next levels of artificial intelligence, because that first foundation is really just understanding what do we have, what are we doing. Many of you, I'm sure, struggle with simply the basics of how much spend do we have in this category, when was the last time, where's that contract. That's just basic understanding, is by getting that information into our tools. Because the next level of digital transformation is really starting to learn from that data. We can start to add internal context to the picture. We can start to say it's not just which preferred suppliers do we have, but what are the rules and guidelines by when we're meant to use them. We can start to have the data in our systems that says not just what suppliers were picked, but we have the bids and the analysis to tell us why they won. We have the bid analysis that provides benchmarks that can help us guide us on new sourcing events, not just what suppliers' performance was last quarter, but why their performance was good or bad or indifferent. And that's the realm of learning. Now we're starting to spot patterns that we can't see through our basic Excel skills. We're starting to leverage the power of artificial intelligence, which can really look for correlations that are far beyond the visible eye, to start finding those deeper insights. And it's the insights that's going to drive, in the procurement world, higher productivity, higher value, higher savings, higher value add to our stakeholders. And only once we've captured our data and tapped into the internal context and internal sources of information that helps bring more context to that data, can we really start moving out to that third level of really sort of leading edge digital transformation, where we're starting to tap into external sources and external context through social listening, to hearing what's happening out in the marketplace, even before it's maybe hitting the newswire or being reported through our normal channels. We can start to tap into proprietary market intelligence reports and other sources of information to really further augment the context. Now we're getting into the realm of sort of predictive analytics and really helping us forecast and look ahead and spot not just what's happening now and why, but where the ball is heading, and starting to really make even deeper connections. But it all starts with capturing the data and sort of using what we've got, despite the challenges of learning curves and an imperfect environment of things not always being how we'd like them. The next real learning is really about the process itself and how integral technology is these days. It used to be that we'd work on redesigning processes and talk about activities and workflows, and at some point you talk about technology as the quote-unquote enabler. But in this case, we looked at it much differently. We looked at all these processes on the left-hand side, thought about how we wanted to do it in the future, and we asked ourselves some real kind of future-proofing questions as it relates to our business and to technology. What's core? What do we want to be core competency? What's not? What role is technology going to play in each of these? What's the art of the possible? What's commercially available right now, so we can start to build a plan and a roadmap to getting to this higher state? What skills are required? What are we going to do? What are we going to stop doing? There's an example where one team was very busy building. I think they were calling them category profiles, where they were spending time just documenting factoids about particular categories and the markets they're in. Not a lot of insights or actions, but just busy documenting that people thought that was useful information. And we were looking at these activities and says, what value is that bringing, and why is that necessary for somebody to compile this when almost all that information is available almost at the touch of a button anytime you want it, just through the internet or just through other data sources in our company? And wouldn't it be more value adding if we moved away from just documenting what the category is to documenting what the strategy should be for us to take advantage and to fully leverage our strength and our spend in that category to our best advantage, and move towards action-oriented work. So we stopped that team from doing that, and we enabled them with better market intelligence tools and better data analysis tools to move towards much more action-focused category strategies. And that helped to really design a process of where they wanted to be, and not just help them better enable what they were currently doing. The last point I'll mention is around the topic of humanizing the digital experience. We all have examples of how, technology can be a blessing or a curse. So when we're evaluating our processes, particularly when they are automated and even controlled by tools and technology, the real key to success here, in a word, is empathy. We got to think about the people and the end users and the behaviors we're trying to enable. We got to move beyond sort of process design and roles and org charts and tool rollout plans to really start thinking much more deeply about the people it's going to touch and how we're going to incentivize, motivate, and make this a meaningful, useful, and productive experience for them. This is the secret sauce where I see it probably fall down even at the in those final stages where good ideas were developed, but the implementation of it didn't get some of the real key points well. Starts with setting an overall digital strategy that's cohesive and clear. It really helps to know where the ball is going so you can design for that future state. But then it gets into things that are in our control as we think about how to improve our processes or to make our toolkits better. It's about really thinking, how is it going to make it easy for the end user? How can we personalize this and let them use their data that we have, that we're collecting, that is now available? How do you use it for good to make it simple? You can even take it to the point of how do you make it fun. This is the realm of design almost. Steve Jobs was the Jedi master at this, right? He studied human behavior, ergonomics, philosophy. He cared deeply about the user experience and how the design of his products and services made people feel. Making it easy, thinking about the human experience is what's going to drive adoption. Adoption of these technologies is what's going to drive proficiency. Proficiency of these tools is what's going to drive that productivity, and that's where the shortfall often is in these plans that we have. So I'm conscious of time, so that's really what I had. the real takeaways are use the tools, get that data in there because it's your seeds for artificial intelligence and the digital future. Future-proof your process by thinking about where you want to be, not just enabling what you're doing today, and really keep your end users and humanize the experience to the greatest extent possible. Go beyond making it work to making it work great. There's a reason why we pick up HubGrub and Uber and others, and we love it on first contact because they've made it so enjoyable and easy for us. That's the secret sauce. And so with that, I'll pass it back over to Paul, and we'll wrap up and take some questions.
Thank you, Wayne. Yeah, great. Thank you. You know, a couple of years ago, I was speaking to a senior analyst in the procurement technology space, and I won't mention any names. And we were talking about the plans to develop. We were talking about our software, indeed, and the plans that we had to develop a phenomenal user experience, something that people would be delighted by, and it would be easy to use and intuitive and exciting and so on. And this analyst said to me, don't make it too easy to use, because these people have a certain vested interest in being the experts in their field. So, they want to have their jobs protected. You shouldn't make your software too easy to use. And I was completely dumbstruck by that. The notion that a procurement analyst should think that procurement professional's job is using software rather than doing procurement. I still to this day I find it quite staggering. Humanizing the process is the only way we're going to transform anything. And when we're talking about procurement and the process to try and get new types of value, completely different types of savings, different types of value, we have to look at simplifying the process from the user's perspective. As individuals, as human beings in the process, any of us, we have to be able to work faster, work at greater scale, and cover a greater degree of the operation. And we have to get to the value and the revenue and the savings quicker and faster than ever before. And the way to do that is to engage us with the tools that we have to use, not make them more difficult, not make it so that only the experts can use them. The phrase, well, I don't want it easy because then anybody else can come in and do the job. That's completely missing the point. So Julian Birkinshaw at the London Business School, he had this phrase, use simplicity to fight complexity. And that's where I'd like to leave you with, is make it easy to use, make the process easy, make dealing with the suppliers easy, make finding the contract easy, finding the things you need to buy, make it easy, make it simple, and that will fight the complexity in the business. And that will enable you to achieve real transformation, thinking about it from a human perspective. Katie, I think we're coming up on the end of the time, but it would be great if we could fit some questions in.
Yes, yeah, let's jump into that. I'm going to steal that Julian Birkinshaw quote for my own, so we can have a quote swap. So we have a question. Somebody's asking, many of the software products on the market today plot the digitization of procurement to start at the spend analysis stage. Do you see a time when such software will plot the digitization of procurement to start at the budgetary construction stage and then track real-time delivery to the P&L? Who wants to take that?
Short answer, yes, from me. Wayne, you want?
Yeah, I love the question actually, because that I think is the next sort of golden ring that procurement needs to grasp, is creating that what I call the decoder ring of converting procurement savings into budgetary decisions and budgetary impact, and absolutely that is where the ball is going. The spend analysis, the usage of these tools, not just spend analysis, but savings reporting tools, and capturing that data right is the steps taken to really create that bridge to finance and the budgeting process. And there could be nothing better for procurement to have a seat that early on in the process, during the budgeting process, to bring their ideas and get their ideas baked into the next year's budget, rather than chasing stakeholders with their ideas after budgets have already been set.
Fantastic.
Great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I mean, the real-time tracking is the emergent property of unification, and indeed spend analysis will ultimately pass and go as artificial intelligence and machine learning takes over the process of real-time parsing and understanding and interpretation of the spend patterns. Then the current model we have of taking historical data and analyzing it will start to be superseded with a more real-time approach, and that will then make it much easier to start from a sort of strategic plan perspective, a budgetary perspective, than ever before.
Fantastic. Thanks for such great answers, guys. Quite a practical question from somebody here. If you've got no source to contract or P2P tool in place, what would your recommendation be? Where do you start? With source to contract or with P2P?
That's another.
If I could just take that first, Wayne. At a fundamental level, the place to start is with the data. Get control of the data, understand where it is, where it's coming from, and ensure that you have means as the procurement department to access it. And once you do that, you can then set the ground for moving into how you define the technology platform. Without the data, it's very, very difficult to make some kind of headway. That's certainly my interpretation, Wayne.
I would echo that and add a practical point of view that, to me, and maybe it's bias, I would start with spend analysis. You think about spend analysis, to me, enables better sourcing, higher savings, higher contracted savings. P2P tool helps to really drive compliance and helps ensure that those savings are captured. You absolutely need both. It doesn't do any good contracting great deals if on the back end nobody's using them. But to the extent that you want to actually prioritize which one's going to help drive value, I would start with savings and capture higher savings, and then quickly improve the back end to improve compliance, to make sure that you get as much flowing to the bottom line as possible. Many different environments could change my response, but that's typically how I would look at it.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. I'll just do one final question. It kind of returns more to the human bit that we're talking about. If you had to give one kind of killer tip on if you're getting a lot of user stakeholder resistance from trying to put in some new tools, some new technologies, what advice would you give somebody to overcome that?
Find a champion. User adoption is key. It's the key to everything. And one of looking at the kind of traditional received wisdom of how you roll out software, it's you take everyone into a classroom, you give them a training course, you teach them how to use it, go away and expect them to use it. That just doesn't work anymore. The way I see technology working in organizations, not just procurement technology, but everything, is where you can find one person who others respect and enjoy working with, who really gets it, really buys into it, and they become a nexus of change within individual work groups. So actually don't bother investing in structured training programs. Find the champions and use them to catalyze the adoption.
I would agree. There's many things you need to do to drive behaviors. You need to communicate the change. You do need to provide the training for the skills, but probably none more important, as Paul mentioned, which is really getting leadership alignment, not just within procurement, but across the functions. Without the leaders walking the talk and supporting this, then a lot of the other efforts that we put in behind the scenes don't take traction. It's the secret sauce to driving behaviors.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your questions and for those great answers. I'm afraid that is all we have time for this afternoon, but I hope that you've found the session useful. I'd like to thank our speakers, Paul and Wayne at GEP, for taking part, sharing their expertise and experiences, and thank you to the audience for listening and participating. As I said at the start, the webinar will be available on demand, so feel free to watch it again and share it with your colleagues. The slides will also be available if you want to take a deep dive into those. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your day.